Concorde had an enviable safety record, especially for an aircraft working at such extremes. There had never been a fatality, but that was to change on the 25th of July, 2000. That afternoon, 100 passengers eagerly awaited Air France Flight 4590 to John F. Kennedy Airport. A German company had specially chartered the Concorde as a spectacular start to a 16-day cruise leaving New York. But there was a delay. The Concorde Air France planned to fly was out of service, and they were using a standby, Sierra Charlie, the oldest Concorde in the fleet. It had a fault on the thrust reverser on engine number 2. The repairs would hold up the flight for 2 hours. Meanwhile, there was confusion in the dispatch area. 500 kilograms of extra luggage had been loaded without being recorded on the manifest.
C'est bon.
On the flight deck, the crew were keen to take off. The captain was Christian Marty, a French national celebrity, the first man to windsurf the Atlantic. He'd ordered the maximum amount of fuel. Concorde needed every drop to get to New York. Marty expected to burn 2 tons just taxiing out to the runway. With the thrust reverser fixed, the passengers finally started to board. The dispatcher brought Marty the manifest. It listed the overall weight, crucial for calculating the takeoff. But without the extra luggage, it showed the aircraft lighter than it was. In the South Air Traffic Control Tower, Concorde's flight controller was Gilles Logelin.
Air France 4590, bonjour.
4590, bonsoir.
The flight recorders give us a record of every word spoken that day.
Approchez-le de vous et mettez-le devant votre bouche comme nous vous le montrons.
The airport was busy. At the far end of runway 26 right, an Air France 747 was waiting to cross on its way to the terminal. It had landed moments earlier. On board was the French President Jacques Chirac, who was returning from a G8 summit in Japan.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous attendons quelques instants pendant que le Concorde utilise la piste en face de nous.
At 4:42, Captain Marty lined up the Concorde on the runway. They hadn't used over half the taxiing fuel. This now made the aircraft an additional ton overweight.
Air France 4590,
piste 26 droite.
vent 090, 8 nœuds. Décollage autorisé.
Est-ce que tout le monde est prêt?
Oui.
Vers 100, V1, 150, top.
Marty accelerated to V1, the speed at which he was committed to take off.
4
V1. Attention!
Encore 45-90, vous avez des flammes derrière vous.
Ouais, donc moteur 2. Le maintien.
45-90, vous avez de fortes flammes derrière vous.
Là, j'ai coupé. Non, le train ne rentre pas.
Pompier leader, le Concorde, je ne connais pas ses intentions.
Bon, j'ai le coupé. Trop tard. Il faut leur laisser le complet. Non?
The terrifying last moments were videoed from inside the cab of a passing truck.
De Gaulle, tour de pompier leader, vous pouvez me donner la situation du Concorde là?
The flight of Air France 4590 lasted less than 90 seconds. The Concorde had crashed 3 miles from the airport into a small hotel close to the town of Gonesse. All 100 passengers and 9 crew on board, and 4 people on the ground were killed. Patrick Tess, owner of the hotel next door, was just yards away from the point of impact.
So I was in my office, on the telephone with my back to the window. Then my conversation was drowned out by an extraordinary noise. I turned around, and there I saw, facing me, Concorde in flames and at a high angle, approaching the hotel at breakneck speed. And its course made me think it would hit this side. And then I thought I had just a few seconds to live.
Madame Christine Turpin was on her way back from the shops.
And I saw a plane with fire behind it, and I was just stupefied. I saw it was Concorde. I was so surprised to see the plane like that, which went like this, and then it fell like that. I thought he had fallen on my house. I was so surprised. I stopped. I called the fire department. There was no answer. I called my home. No answer. So I left the car and went to the accident site.
One of our clients wrapped himself in a towel soaked in the bath to get closer to the fire. But he came out a few seconds later telling us it's not worth it, don't go there. There's nothing left, just bodies. And actually, we saw that there were bodies, pieces of people.
And there you are. It's sad.
The aircraft, loaded with fuel, burned for 3 hours. The emergency services placed road cones to mark the human remains. News flashed around the world.
And I thought, why, how, what's gone wrong? My heart dropped because in all the years that I'd been perhaps responsible for British Airways Concorde, as many others were as well, I dreaded a major accident.
I, like most people involved with the aircraft closely, was in a state of shock for several days. And as the facts slowly began to emerge, it just made me feel sick. Sick in the stomach, it really did.
Debris from the crash was taken to the hangars at Le Bourget, the airport where Captain Marty had hoped to land. Immediately, the French investigation unit, the BEA, started to look into possible causes. Work colleagues of the dead crew, who knew their voices, came in to help decipher the recordings. The BEA was assisted by foreign investigators, including American Robert McIntosh from the National Transportation Safety Board.
We began to get a picture of the sequence of events. Certainly, we knew that there was a normal takeoff. We could hear this on the cockpit voice recorder. The aircraft accelerated up through 100 knots. It accelerated up through 150 knots. At a point of about 175 knots, there were things that were detected by the crew. There were noises. Something was going wrong. And then the heading of the aircraft, which would normally be straight down the runway, began to deviate off to the left.
The investigation switched to the runway. Tyre marks clearly showed the path the aircraft had taken, veering left to miss Chirac's 747 by just 30 feet. Chunks of rubber were evidence that one of the Concorde's tyres had burst.
This would be like something you might see on a highway that had come from a large truck.
And close by, the possible cause, a 43-centimetre strip of bent metal.
There was a piece of evidence, a metal strip that appeared to be of the same form as the cut on the tire.
Investigators believed the Concorde had gone over the metal strip, which cut and burst the tire, sending a large chunk of rubber into the wing above.
And it literally broke the bottom of the tank, not by penetrating, but by forcing another part of the bottom of the tank to break loose.
What caused the fuel to ignite is still not clear. Possibly a spark from a broken electrical cable.
We noticed the aircraft took off early. At that time, there was this huge flame that had developed on the left side, and that's the famous picture that everybody saw.
Flames and debris were sucked into the air intakes, causing both engines to lose power.
On this particular takeoff, it never remotely got near its safety speed, and it never got above about 200 feet.
For the investigation, the question remained, where had the mysterious metal strip come from? Closer inspection revealed it was from the engine of a Continental Airlines DC-10, which had used the same runway just 5 minutes earlier. The French investigators were satisfied that they had solved the cause of the crash. But a number of Concorde pilots and engineers were not.
They're trying to suggest that that single strip of metal was the only reason that Concorde came down. I find totally unbelievable and implausible. Aircraft accidents are seldom down to one thing only. It's a combination of factors. And there were a lot of other factors at play in that day.
One of the central allegations involves a unique feature of Concorde. Fuel can be pumped from a rear tank forward to balance the aircraft for flight. As the Concorde was overweight, the flight engineer would have moved fuel forwards to compensate. At the crash site, switches were found left on, suggesting this could be the case. It may have been fuel was pumped into the tank above the bursting tire, overfilling it.
And so you get this great lump of rubber slamming into the underside of the wing by tank number 5, literally like a missile strike, and it set up a shockwave in the fuel in that tank, and the energy in that shockwave had absolutely nowhere to go because there's no airspace. And I think it is quite reasonable to argue that if the fuel tanks had not been overfilled for that takeoff, and this is my view, I emphasize that, but I think it's quite possible that the subsequent disaster might not have happened.
Air France agree that fuel pumping is normal procedure, but dispute the tank could have been overfilled.
We transfer between 800 kilos to 1 ton, but always with automatic level detection systems. There cannot be any overfilling of a tank with these systems, which are automatic.
But it's not only operating procedures that have come under scrutiny. Serious questions have been raised about whether Concorde had fatal design flaws.
A great big buzz going around saying that Concorde was inherently unsafe, it was a fragile bird, and that, quite honestly, in my opinion, is a load of rubbish.
Don't try and tell me that there were design deficiencies in Concorde. I do not accept that. I spent 15 years flying that airplane, and I regard it as the safest airplane I have ever flown.
In the 10 years since the crash, the big question is, was Concorde an accident waiting to happen?